Our guests, Barbara Frydyk, the director of the Department for Culture in Gdańsk, Bogna Świątkowska, the foundation Without Change, Dr. Kamila Kamińska, University Wrocław, Institute of Pedagogy. She was one of the co-author of the program Rezydencja. Erwin Bendik, Polityka Weekly, Professor Mateusz Błaszczyk, Institute of Sociology of the University of Wrocław. And the moderator, the chair of the discussion will be Max Cegielski, a journalist, writer. I don't need to introduce Max. Right, I'm giving over to you. Please join us here. Thank you. Thank you for the invitation and for the honor to moderate the meeting, which, well, it doesn't seem that our objective now would be to evaluate Wrocław, the city of Wrocław. This has been done already, of course, and as I understand in sociologists' circles, in different meetings, such research connected with evaluation has been for some time already translated, explained, analyzed, and so on. But it seems, however, that the experience of Wrocław, this Wrocław experience, the experience of evaluation, can be interesting for other cities, of course, for the, well, practitioners of culture in other cities. And it seems that since we have, well, it comes so that we have people from Warsaw and they will ask for asylum here in Wrocław or maybe in Szczecin or maybe in the city of Łódź. It can happen. Well, there is a representative of Gdańsk and there are some representatives of Wrocław, and we would be quite willing to learn from them. It doesn't have to be the convention of good advice, but it might be some sort of help and support. But first I want to start from the term itself, the term of evaluation, because every time I heard the word, this term emerged and appeared in the so-called artistic industry, this was the reason to get scared, really, because this is a word which is normally used by our sponsors from different corporations and companies and businesses that want to evaluate. They want to do some evaluation. They want to see some specific concrete results. The creators, however, starting from stars down to the designer proletariat, they are scared of the words because they are scared of a certain instrumentalization of culture. They are scared that culture might become something that is only seen through its economic effects, its social effects, which is of course difficult. So let me first start with the notion of evaluation, and I would first ask Edwin Bendik, who has traveled around Poland extensively and has seen many social situations locally. He has been analyzing them and he has been watching these situations from a certain distance. How about you? Are you scared of the word evaluation? Do you think that Wrocław, by presenting the research, has shown some way to Gdańsk, to Warsaw, Gorlice, where you have been recently? Can it be used by other cities? Or maybe it is like the other cities in Poland, they might have this economic attitude that they lack the research. Well, okay, the last word that you just used is key. Evaluation and research. Evaluation, if evaluation is just to measure, just to have people account for their work, for participants, for the results of the project, that might be a problem if we do not understand what really is happening within the project, if we don't really understand the context first, if this is not pre-examined properly. If this applies to Wrocław, well, here in this case, we are lucky that the evaluation is is put on the top of the good tradition of the research into the city, into the social tradition, because this has been for the third time already, I think. And you can see how the city has developed, has changed. You could see what has happened in the culture. So this is just to supplement a certain picture that we already understand. But the measurement itself in the situation that we have right now in the culture, which is the field of the most intense changes, practices, institutionalization. There's a lot of stuff going on in this field. So without this understanding what is happening in this field, it would be really not reasonable. It would be pointless. And we can see that other cities have understood that it is not only sufficient to poll the people, to ask the people what they really understand under this term culture, how they participate in the culture. You need to go deeper, you need to delve deeper. For Warsaw, that was a big discovery when, for the program of development of culture, we did some deeper and wider research and also some operational programs attached to it. And it turns out that in Warsaw and also in the other cities, because I'm just talking about Warsaw, and we just caught it in the process, how out of a city a metropolis becomes, how the relations in the culture change, and this institutional order, the way how you create knowledge, it's not adequate. There is a lot of tension inside the artistic and cultural milieus. They have mistrust to each other. There is the social sector that thinks that the government is doing something tricky, but there is no common knowledge. This knowledge, if you looked at Grzegorz Lewandowski, and you could collect all the official and unofficial knowledge from him. There is no one location where you can do it. There are many locations and sources of knowledge. You need to research into them, and you need to try to make this reconnaissance. Also, this applies to other cities. The example of Gdańsk has been mentioned. This extended field of culture examination. This is very interesting. This is an attempt to answer to the question what is happening outside of the institutions. And we were talking about this at the Congress of Culture. 95% of the expenditure on culture goes into institutions, and there is the conviction that what is most interesting in the culture, this is created outside of the institutions. So this is done for the 5%, or maybe there are some other funds. People are able to mobilize, to create culture, not necessarily for public money. And maybe the people of this institutionalized world of culture have a problem to understand this, because the normal users and consumers of culture, they have solved this problem somehow. And you need to understand this problem well in order to learn from each other how you can manage the whole area of culture and how you can apply this approach to the whole area of culture. So what is happening now, the conclusions from Wrocław are really very valuable because of the scale of the expenditure into culture this year, but also last year and during the preparations for the European Capital of Culture. And we will be watching this very closely, how this will evaluate. Maybe there will be some new forms of institutionalization. That's a hard word for me. And that might be very interesting indeed. Okay, that's good. You are mentioning this. This is really a huge thread. We will be talking about this, but maybe we should be talking about something that is not measurable. And you have mentioned already Gdańsk, the city of Gdańsk. Maybe we just will pass the mic to the colleague. It's not like we have come here and we should boast of Wrocław. Maybe there will be some difficult questions that might relate to ESK, which is the European Capital of Culture. Maybe the Wrocław, the practices of Wrocław, for you in Gdańsk, are you using them? Are you watching them? How do you see it? How do you perceive evaluation? Maybe let me start with the evaluation itself, because we need to carry out processes like this, but when they are done in a technocratic way, just based on indicators, a lot gets lost. You need to calculate, but of course, you need to do it, but how to do it in this methodology? We don't have this methodology. We haven't elaborated it yet, and maybe it is not possible to elaborate one common methodology because the field of culture is really very expanded, it's really very wide. It is in the registers that we might not even perceive that culture is going on there. It might be somewhere else. The same applies to indicators, to measures that, of course, when they are growing, when they are increasing, the government of the city is very happy. But if they increase, sometimes it is not so good. And this is a phenomenon. Well, there is the question, shall we really care about statistics and the number in the audience? No, not really. I think the quality and the quality-related method should be something that we should be interested in. In terms of the example of Wrocław, of course, we stay in touch. There is this initiative which is very valuable, which has developed underway, I mean the coalition of cities, and the results will be visible only in a couple of years. So we are we are in a hurry, so to say. We would like to jump over something, but this is a lengthy process that requires to be on your watch, to be watching. In Gdańsk we have our own way. Of course, every city is different, and we should be watching each other. We should actually learn from our experiences. Just talk into the mic, please. Right. In the audience, we have people from Lublin, from Szczecin. I hope they will join the discussion. Now, to follow up this thread, what we measure and whether something gets lost during the measurement. This positivistic approach, there is the thread that we may come to the conclusion that we can measure everything. We can, of course, start measuring the quality. We may set ourselves some definitions and parameters that we will be measuring in terms of good quality, but the question is, is it possible to catch in these examinations everything here in Wrocław, or maybe there is some process going on under the skin, so to say, and only after some years the results will show up only? You can never say that you know everything, because this would mean that we are idiots. Of course there are certain processes going on under the skin, so to say. Normally I'm not using any statistics at all. I'm the representative of pedagogy of the university, and what's the most important in the work of a teacher is love to the child, love to the development of the child, and this cannot be measured. Exactly the same applies to culture. For example, beauty cannot be measured. All the other things that are the most important ones cannot be measured. I co-authored 2 evaluation reports, one of 2015. Mr. Mai asked our team to prepare an evaluation of microgrants, and I took up the task with my team because since I'm a doctor, a PhD doctor from the university, but I'm also an animator, and I was quite interested in the development of the program. It was really an exceptional experience for us because, well, first the definition of evaluation. The evaluation is just checking the quality of performance of objectives. Luckily, nobody asked me to measure profits, money, business that is generated in culture, in public space. I don't know that at all. So we just looked at the objectives. In the case of microgrants, this was about grassroots initiatives, and we used interviews, observations, focus tests, and we were asked for our recommendation. That this was the first experience in my life. I, myself, as a scientist, was listened to, but for the first time, and I like to underscore it always that the whole change in the approach to how the applications were changed for micrograms, the budget was increased. These were our recommendations by the academia scientists, and they were listened to by the European Capital of Culture. Then we evaluated 3 measures, 3 dimensions of the objectives. I mean the residents. The objective of the residence program was not to encourage people at the grassroots level to get active. It was about the artists getting involved into the European dimension, learning from each other and so on, networking as well. So we, with our colleagues, we researched into these aspects, and based on interviews and observations, we just looked at how much the European values, networking, learning, to what extent they could be seen within the program, and we could prove that it was happening. Within the project, there were some exceptional actions, like, for example, Klaus Burger. He built here a barrack. It stood around here, and this was not a space of poverty and exclusion. There was poetry inside. There was the experience of space in the barracks built by the people who live there. I didn't have to research into how much it cost and how much it changed the situation of the Roma people. The purpose of the residence was not like this, of the residence program was not this one. If I may, okay, the first thing is that when starting this enterprise of the evaluation of the European Capital of Culture, we adopted conscientiously a different starting point. Unlike in the case of standard evaluations, we have gone through a lot of evaluation reports from the previous capitals of culture, and what dominates there is increase, decrease, change, plus, minus, and so on. So, and this assumption, well, I don't know where this assumption came from, but the assumption was that the purpose of the European Capital of Culture was to increase a certain indicator of participation in culture on the part of residents. After some time it will go down, but it will be higher than compared with the beginning time. Now, let me quote an anecdote. When starting this project, before that we were researching into Wrocław diagnosis. It was in 2014, and we did some deep research into ESK, into European Capital of Culture, into the expectations of the residents, and there was an indicator that the level of participation in culture is around 8%. So the assumption is that during the European Capital of Culture it would increase up to 16%, and it would go down to 12%, and then it would stay like this in the years thereafter. And then we wanted to know where those data came from, 8, 16, 12%, how come? And when we were just, wandering around different institutions, talking to politicians, talking to culture activists, we were asking everybody, how come you have this data? Where does it come from? How was it determined? And what's the quality of the data? Nobody knew it. And one day, somebody asked me, guys, where do you have those numbers, 8, 12, and 16? And then we came to the conclusion that we were the authors. We were seen as the authors of the indicators, that we are the origin of the data. But this shows a problem that appears in the evaluation. What is the participation? How to measure it? What does it relate to? How does it translate? There's lots of challenges, scientific challenges, research challenges that we faced when taking up this study. Of course, it's nice to look at the diagrams and so on. 65% of the residents of Wrocław declared that they had taken part in some event, some events under the auspices of the European Capital of Culture. 2/3 knew that there was something going on in terms of ESK, but when we did the quality research, the quality survey, when we were talking to the people said, okay, let us wait when the European Capital of Culture will start. They knew, well, it started some time ago. Well, when it starts really, then we will participate. But when we talked to them, it turned out that they already attended 1, 2, 3 events under the auspices of the European Capital of Culture. These were not only like niche programs, but flagship programs, exhibitions or something. They didn't associate ESK with this event. They were waiting for the ESK, but they participated already in some events. Even more, when talking to the people about the participation in culture, their cultural practices, how they see it, how they understand it, it turned out, what Jacek already said, that the way of understanding culture Oh, that's okay, that's nice. Participation in culture, that's one thing. But the notion of culture, there are so many, truly speaking, there are so many ways how to define culture, how to understand culture, and that what might be something for one part of the people might not be something for the other group of people. The participation is in different ways, and the approaches may be very different to this problem. Let me join you in here, so to say. So some time ago in Warsaw there was a survey about the participation in culture, and in this survey there is a brutal piece of information for the circles of culture producers. People do not participate in the events to absorb very complex intellectual assemblage, but they want to spend time. They want to spend free time. And what you have just shown us, you were afraid, you were concerned that only 75% of people wanted to spend free time. They wanted to get busy, to get occupied in their leisure time by participating in culture. This is absolutely the basic way how people think about, how the normal, ordinary people think about culture. Now, if you imagine that the residents of this city participated in all the events with the objective to capture all these subtleties, we need to confront the question that the majority of the participants who come to the institutions of culture, they declare that this is the best place for dating, to spend time with your family, or to relax, to enjoy some relaxing ways of being in the world, which does not exert from you any intellectual effort. That's true, that's brutal but true, and in the case of this portion of evaluation that we have just seen, this was shown very intensely, and this is the reason for joy. Because 79 or 5% of people spent nice time, had good fun. And this it was actually 78%, and the 12 remaining percent, is there any explanation for the other portion, the 12%? I'm saying this because in view of this huge effort by Wrocław in the recent years, we watched this from all over Poland. We were watching in which direction what happens here would go in the future. This exceptional event, apart from the value of all these events, the budget was huge to organize the time where people, the residents of the city, could participate in, and they got involved. This research shows it. Somehow they got involved, even if not every intention was clear, even if not every message was understood and adopted. The participation rate, however, was high. Now, the question remains whether we, the producers of culture, whether our ambition is to change something permanently by the participation, whether we hope, whether we have created something which might not be a popular slang, which is not very popular, which is the civic society creating some identity of itself and creating itself to be a community. That's a very important objective. I use in my research the definition of Professor Pietraszko. Culture is the way how you live according to values. And the values mean a parity, unlike you showed in your research. ESK research was mentioned by you, was dubbed by you as being masculine, and this raised some upheaval in the lobby. I was born in Wrocław, and one of the absolute effects of ESK is the cinema which is called Nowe Horyzonty. This includes one of my absolutely favorable projects, Wrocław, which means that children should not be excluded from culture. I'm a mom myself. I spent a lot of time in museums, and I recommend it to you. My children visited Tate Modern on their 4 feet, so to say. I recommend the Fort Down pavilion to take your children to because you don't have to pay. There is no rain, and the children can play around in a very clean environment. You can relax there as a mom. Spending free time. I don't know what actually free time is, but I think that it's splendid if you can spend your time here in this hideout in Barbara. This is also some sort of participation and creation of community, because even if when they can sell 100 tickets in Wrocław, where moms come with their children, we spend time, we talk to each other. It's not yet another location where you can win a washing machine just by buying a ticket. We are not talking about baking some cookies, but people come who want to talk about life, culture, and so on and so on. So this is something that creates culture. This is the cultural role, culture creation roles. If I understood you well, Bogna, this was ironic. Your contribution was ironic of sorts, because this. However, this was not a negative perception of free time. Not at all. I really highly appreciate this. At meetings of us, culture producers, we can talk about whether our effort to produce the highest possible quality of content, whether this effort is satisfied by our teams that we cooperate with, and whether culture that we are offering to the so-called consumers, whether this culture is of the highest possible quality. But when talking about participation in culture, we are on a position where we are talking about the unconditional joy stemming from participation, stemming from any participation, because on the one hand it translates into statistics that you talked about, and the public funding was mentioned, because public funding must use some statistics. It has to get some confirmation that the funds were spent in a sensible way. On the other side, however, when talking about the younger generation, it's about like reflexes, like habits, to be willing to be in an environment which is based on the culture. Culture can be different. It can be traditional culture. It can be culture that promotes values of community, which is perceived in a very traditional way, which is not really tolerant, which is enclosed. This can be possible. There can be some activities connected with culture that is offered by self-government, by local governments. It may be funded from public funds in some other way, which are opening in their nature, trying to build a wider community, and this was the objective of Wrocław. Wrocław wanted to create a community in a way without barriers, without exclusions, to show that the space of culture is a space where we can look for contacts over any divisions between us in all possible zones. But for me, that doesn't mean that we have to negotiate the quality. The festival in Wrocław is not stupid. It's not for blondies. When you give birth to a child, you are deprived of your brain, which is not true, of course. You should laugh. You should laugh after expressions like this. It's just to show the distance. Okay. I will not start crying that you are not laughing at what I'm saying. I fully agree with you. As for spending free time, in Gdańsk, the operational program that we are conducting, the strategies of the city, was dubbed Culture and Leisure, culture, free time, because widening the field of culture means that we are not able to diagnose every activity that is creating culture, but we might not know of it. In terms of statistics and the traps connected with statistics, I want to mention that the data delivered to our chief statistical office, this data is not verified. Even passerbys are counted when the attendance of certain exhibitions is measured. This is a problem known from Warsaw. Whoever just passes by and who stopped, that was a difference. And the actions of walking by started then some time ago, many years ago. So 2 remarks from me, both apply to our research, to our survey. The first thing is that we tried in our survey, whenever it was possible, when evaluating specific enterprises, we wanted to apply a complex scale of effects of participation in culture. This tool, this is an international tool that was elaborated some time ago, modified by us somehow, which was supposed to show 4 principal effects of participation in, I can't remember now what these categories are. However, honestly speaking, this was just, the results were average, really. The results showed that the events that we organized, they brought different effects, and every effect was present. I mean, the effect of enticing people intellectually, people come and get enlightened, get creative, so to say. Another effect is the aesthetic experience, that you come in touch with some transcendental values, so that you stop being simpleton. But then there is another effect. Yes, that was fun. Okay, it was nice for me, and so all the effects were visible. They were there depending on the event, on the nature of the event that you participated in. However, as for the free time, and now we are getting trapped here really, because this is also present in the notion of culture, because normally in the public perception, culture is located in the free time zone. Participation is in the free time zone. There is a separation, clear separation of 2 zones. The normal daily practices, the daily duties, family, work, your job, and other nuisances and pains in the neck that you need to manage. And on the other side, the free time, the mythical free time when you can participate in culture. Normally, culture is located in the free time. However, the problem consists in the transgressing the border between them, going from one category to the other category. For certain category of services, there is no division. There is no division line. This is all the same. When talking about sophisticated participants in culture, some elites, new elites of culture, for them, it's regardless. Culture is an element of their daily lives, and the understanding that spending your free time means immediately spending your free time in culture. This is about how you define the culture. There is a sequence of different aspects, but they would say, when asked, what do you mean? What is the participation in culture? We are there. We are in the culture all the time. Of course, here now, because I have a small child, we just spend our time out in the culture just 3 times a week instead of 6. One question, just to make the question boil down to the city, because the city has vanished somehow in the meantime. Culture emerges in a certain space. It would be worthwhile to look at how the structure of cities has changed, the professional and social structure of the cities. The creative class, which is losing the importance. Around 30% of people in the cities work in professions that can be called the creative class: teachers, engineers, academia, scientific staff, advertisers, and so on. So this is around 30%. And for them, culture, around 8% out of them, they are super creative. They really work intensely with symbols. So this the passing over this parting line between your work and culture vanishes really, because you work in culture, so to say. So this would be worthwhile to remember. And also the city aspect. Is Rafał Kozak with us? He has vanished. If he is with us, I would like to ask him just to add some more comments. There is another question about Lublin, because there was this effect which was a surprise to everybody. It was not the objective, because the evaluation took place automatically, spontaneously in the street on the 800th anniversary of the existence of the city. Lublin lost, namely, in the battle for the European capital of culture with Wrocław. And the 700th anniversary, I don't understand really what happened there, but it was really an exceptional occurrence. For several days around the anniversary, there was the show by there was a show shown in the castle, and there was a queue of thousands of people wanting to get tickets to get into the show. And what was it? Was it about killing your free time, or was it an expression of being in the city through the culture in a different way as a resident? So that's a question. I don't want to take over the role of the moderator. I don't want to speak for Mr. Kozak. Well, he has gone, but maybe we could hear some interesting opinions from Szczecin, because there are representatives of Szczecin among us, just to put some order into it.
Because I really believe the whole paradox and the debate that we've got engaged about urban culture, it's all about the urban, the city. This paradox is about treating culture as sacrum. You also said that lots of participants perceive culture as very special zone. Taking part in culture may become a lifestyle, an English word, the very word. It's a duty. The new urban dweller, all the events, the festivals, the stagings, this is the part of the duty that one has to attend, to take part in a little bit of culture. I think sociologists will respond instantly that the category of leisure is very much about large cities, in small townships, in the country. There is no time for oneself, there's no leisure, you're always busy. But it's a good question, Max. Culture and cultural events that were saturating the European capital of culture is part of the fittings and fixtures, some sort of ecosystem in the city. We can't imagine a well-operated city without this kit, without this rigging. Obviously, there is a network of institutions. It's pretty much about tangible things, but we can't imagine a well-operated city without a cultural offer, and a offer that goes beyond the institution, engaging and attracting. And then we have Koza. Koza appeared, and he created this wonderful event. One more theme you wanted to say. Well, as a sociologist and a scholar engaging in the urban studies, in sociology, urbanity and the city itself is associated with certain lifestyle, and this lifestyle does not mean that it's not defined by work or bringing up children. It is a pursuit of cultural capital offered by the city. The city becomes the intermediary, making it possible to build cultural capital through the various networks and the relationships. May I open a new theme or start a new theme? I want to go beyond Warsaw and Gdańsk. This theme is present in the report, the PDF version. I was reading on the train as I traveled. The effect of ECOC on other cities. So what happens if you don't get a prize, the spectacular situation? And our ambassador the ambassador of Lublin, so bearing in mind the Wrocław experience, what was its effect on Lublin or perhaps other cities? Now, right now, I'd like to respond to Bogna, leisure time, and leisure itself. 79% people go and visit big events. Now, the first movement about the European capital of culture in different cities, and we were not about the night of museum, but the night of galleries of culture, the night of culture. About 100 people in the streets, and we have a true crisis in the street. More people in the streets than in the houses. Now the first thesis was, if they enter the Philharmonics for a short quarter of an hour concert and they see the a musician in tails and a bow tie, now will they come back? Everyone goes and joins in the night of culture with 150 events, and they mix in. There's performance, there's concert, but people do not repeat this experience. They do not return. There was not a survey done by sociologists, by male and female sociologists for big money. People don't want to return to such events, and that's what we saw 5 years ago. They didn't have to do. They've used up their voucher. It was enjoyed. People loved to have fun, but there is nothing about deep emotional effect. And on our 700-year anniversary of the city, we created the sort of big open performances with 2 stagings, 2 plays. There were huge works and there were long queues, and I couldn't believe it was even bigger than in Wrocław. This performance that was produced for Lublin's presentation in Wrocław, we couldn't understand that. We had this staging in the courtyard in the castle, and there was a 5-kilometer queue. But I'm denying myself. 5 years ago, we had a lot of popular culture, and it in a way saturated the demand for pop culture. Now, we produced high-level art, and people come in. No, you've just denied, perhaps you've just denied yourself, because a couple of years ago somebody visited the Philharmonics, and the same person returned 5 years later to see this huge performance in the castle. We don't know what happened. Maybe we simply induced something. We simply implemented something into them. Now, the evaluation. Now, politicians and civil servants need figures. I'm not interested in that. I can't convert or translate the quality, cultural quality, into various rows of figures. This is purely rubbish. If you think about living through something, if you have succeeded in dragging people from their homes, from in front of their television sets, or make them leave their computers, this is something that counts and not the figures. The figures don't turn me on. I believe that all the cities were the winners, because all the cities have managed to change. I had an opportunity on my way here to read the whole report. I think there is one statement, one comment, a very wise phrase. The applications gave trigger to auto-reflection, and they triggered cultural policies. That's what happened in Gdańsk. The cultural policy of the city was redesigned and redefined. So many things happened. I wouldn't be able to describe it. And I think this must have happened to other cities, the other unsuccessful applicants. Being competitive to each other. In each city there were leaders and people engaged. And we knew with 11 cities applying, we started talking to each other. Marek Stark from Szczecin arranged the first meeting. For the first meeting, Marek joined us. He said, "Okay, we are applying." We were not in a sport discipline, in the cultural environment, very different. We made friends, and obviously we become emotional, not winning or winning. But I remember this legendary meeting, and our surveyors, our researchers, Bogdan also joined Lublin. We had a meeting in Lublin because we wanted to do something with this huge load of energy, this huge capacity. The ECOC, there was this one colleague who said, "Oh, why Wrocław has won? Let's make them accountable." And we simply put him down. We just ignored him. There are wonderful effects, there are dramatic effects described in a very scientific way, very scholarly way. But I think this effect of the coalition of the cities, our mayors were concerned, they were rather afraid of launching this initiative. 30,000 people, for example, saw one of the productions, this huge mega production. Łódź arrived here with another production, theatrical production, and there is music recorded for this spectacle. I was Erstadt band, and suddenly this music is ranked third on the top 10, the hit list. Marek from Szczecin generated the container across the whole Europe. So there are things that there is a legacy. As part of the municipal cultural policy, Marek, are you as enthusiastic as Koza is, the beautiful or the fair winning, well, I don't think we've lost. This is not a failure, really. There is no winner, no loser. Now, Koza made it quite clear, and I think I come to this realization at least once a year. He showed us the perspective. The ECOC effect is the time perspective. We met for the first time in 2007, and that was when we simply embarked on this road. And we've been talking about it for 10 years. 10 years, the 10th season. I don't think it calls for very successful production to go on for 10 seasons. But we are approaching winter, but in the general political and economic context. So this perspective of a decade, this perspective gives us something exceptional. I believe it must have had an educational aspect in itself. Cities and the people in the cities who deal with culture, they started talking a different language. They started using a different language in order to talk about culture. There was a wave of surveys, a wave of hate, a wave of comparisons, a wave of meetings among politicians. We had, again, money, a flow of money. Now, we are facing again a wave of survey, evaluation, another hate, and it's all very educational. We appear to have learned a lot. City dwellers, city residents, inhabitants started learning about culture. This is the way to be a resident of Szczecin, an inhabitant of Wrocław. And this is the serious outcome of ECOC. If you have so many people visiting the night or participating in the night of culture, there is township race, 1 million people, Różanka, the Rose Garden, which has become one of the places with so many, the whole range of cultural activities. New ways of participating in different places, different location of culture, such as NFM in Wrocław, or the Philharmonics in Szczecin, or the new Congress Hall in Katowice. If we have this slogan of urban culture, and that's the effect of European capital of culture. Culture has become an integral part, an obvious part of urban reality. Let me bring on another theme. You mentioned sports attire in the Philharmonics. In the Wrocław report we read, so the evaluation survey of ECOC shows that the increase of the offer, cultural offer, cannot be translated to a greater participation in cultural event. Maybe this is the next phase in thinking about culture. Because my impression is that Warsaw has not benefited as much as the others. I believe that the Warsaw institutions are at the old stage, the previous stage, they simply offer free tickets, and this is how they believe they may increase the level of participation, but that's not good enough. In the morning, I think Dr. Michał Cebula said the class conditioning. It doesn't matter. I mean, the city is one big space, social space, and it has a class structure. It's all about affluence and the money availability of things. So there are various relations between the competences and the classes, and the city tries to be flexible and offer and compile an offer. So this is not going to the greater openness will not be translated into the situation where everyone attends theatre. Lublin has just shown us this. The theatre left the building and appeared in the street, right back to the beginnings, and the value was offered to people. Warsaw is facing a slightly different problem. There are certain processes going on there, and we are trying to identify them and discover them. There are several sources of funding in many cities, many metropolises. We have one source of funding with 800 million zlotys, the budget being that, and we have various controllers of the money. We have the voivodeship, we have communities, the boroughs, and we have the city. So the game and the stake is quite different. The institutions are trying to modify themselves and adjust to fit in. Lots of the so-called leisure happens in various clubs or small theaters, and this is all beyond the radar, the reach of the radar. And now, what about the trap? Availability is greater, participation is not so great, but just an intrusion. The Warsaw institutions has carried out a survey, and the participation survey. So there is one agent or factor, gender, or women appear to be the main participants of culture, and they attract men to take part. Men on their own initiative are very rare visitors, seldom visitors. They usually accompanying the guy who accompanies the wife. They simply almost excuse them, give an excuse that they say, but normally they are normal male. Humans, so they wouldn't pick up a cultural event. It's just accompanying the wife. So as we can see, the gender plays certain role. Complaining about participation and what happens to participation from our perspective, people who try to somehow discover the presence of culture in everyday life, we shouldn't be concerned with that, because we need to be more sort of careful about the level of culture offered by various institutions. So we should do our best. We should make every effort to make culture comprehensive or comprehensible. Our institutions should be understandable, clear. I don't need to know the structure of a computer to be able to use it. In order to be able to catch this moment and go through the emotion when I perceive culture, I can come over to a performance and I can be slightly tipsy and start crying because I've been moved and touched by the performance. Now, what you've said, it's just against everything that I'm not challenging you, Bogna. I want to challenge you, gentlemen. It's against what I've been doing for 20 years. For the first shows, of the first screening in the Prem department, that's what we used to call it, there were 3 months only. And then suddenly it all developed and evolved, and we had 100 tickets, because originally I bring people in, people from the country. Sometimes I bring some people in the bus. There were ECOC buses to bring young moms with the children. I don't know whether those people revisit the cinema, but they may do so. And I want the culture to be available. I want it to be open. It's all about the institutions doing their job, and also about educational programs. You can't expect it to happen overnight or within 2 years. We can't say that it's just the middle class visiting the Tate Modern. I am an educationalist and not a sociologist. I do understand your point of view, but I disagree. In our evaluation, we can see that the richest people and the poorest people do not attend, do not participate. So the remains of ECOC. I visited Patch, and Patch used to be European Capital of Culture 2010, I think. And I spent a week in Patch. I was much excited to see what happened in the follow-up, what happened after. As part of the ECOC, they created a street of museums. So this street of museum, it's pretty central, and there are 4 museums, pretty ambitious in terms of arts, and out of curiosity, I went there. They opened at 10, the museums, and closed at 4 p.m. I was there at 2 p.m., and I actually raised panic. I came over and I couldn't speak Hungarian. I spoke a foreign language. They needed to arrange for somebody to find out about me. I bought ticket number 1 on that day. I must have been the first customer to visit on that day. I was visiting the museum, and the person was going in front of me, switching on everything, and then they followed me in order to switch it off. I was the only one. So what kind of museum was that? I can't remember. There were 4 museums. Participant. Look at the participant. A true participant. I think visual arts. Something about visual arts. I think so. ECOC. What is the follow-up of ECOC, and what's left? Yes, we used to be the ECOC. In 2010, we were the ECOC, but it's the past. We moved on. We live our own lives. So Wrocław, many years ago, held the World Congress of Intellectuals, and there are a few people who still keep a memory of that. Do we have any? No, again, I'd like to refer to what Bogdan has said. We need to produce comprehensible culture. We need to create comprehensible institutions, we need to ensure that we are understood, we get the message through. We also need to respond to the demand, because only then people will develop this tie. The Museum of War, for many months people couldn't buy a ticket. I'm not quite sure what's going on now. Now, from the perspective of a father, the Museum of the War was probably the greatest hit on the seacoast, the Baltic seacoast. The European Center of Solidarity was visited by 1 million visitors, 1 million people last year. And this is where social change takes place. This is Gdańsk, part of the Gdańsk identity, and well, Gdańsk has never been the European capital of culture, but that's where culture happens. About understanding, about comprehension and the sense of identity. Professor Hausner keeps repeating that we need to be able to identify the uniqueness of the city. It's only then when we can build or develop the real bonding with the recipient. I think the patch museums was like a landing, some sort of lesson. I think that in 10 years' time we can expect the authorities of Wrocław to run another survey to see the long-term effect, what occurred measurable in the first wave of surveys in the course of I know, can we have you in the front? I can see you're behind the pillar. I think part of the audience is already on the stage, and we can quite smoothly, we can just mix in and ask questions and share comments. Artur Celiński, magazine Miasta, the City magazine. Now, I'll start with a story. It happened in a voivodeship, provincial city. A director of an old civic center starts complaining. They say, we are organizing a musical festival, 2 days of festival, 200 tickets sold for 1,000 or 3,000 seats. So was it a promotion thing? Was it advertising? And he asked advice from a local civic center, and we said we have 2 days, 2,000 tickets, and we sold only 260. So something wrong with the city. There's probably something wrong with the city. So sometimes it's crucial to understand the source of the success and the source of a failure. We can't measure the participants of culture, and some of the cities were actually caught in the trap, and that happened to Łódź, because they started with various indices and they got into a trap. In Wrocław, we are not looking only at Wrocław. Lots of money was injected in Wrocław, and the greatest good was just to see the culture, the sort of good grass initiative. Audience development cost 160,000 zloty. We can see that it's probably changing the city. Maybe less money to mass culture, maybe more money on local initiatives. But remember that the other cities are watching Wrocław. Maybe we need 96 million zlotys from the Department of Culture. Mark Stark and Koza should join in order to trigger the society. Jelenia Góra has a dilemma, and it's not about participation, it's about the process, the course. I do agree with Barbara Friedrich. It calls for different indices. Well, we have money in order to measure things in a certain scale. And one more thing. Michałowo, near Białystok, they have the gas pipeline, so they've got lots of money, and they open 3 different institutions of culture. They simply copied Warsaw, and it all was going on well until the authorities changed, until new people came to government. And obviously it's used by the local tourists, but not by the local community. So in a very small town in Kaszuby, the north of Poland, there is a beautiful pavilion, an exhibition of wreaths, the harvest feast wreaths. But it depends very much on individuals who act as drivers and who are committed. Arthur raised a very important point. We need to face it. Wrocław, we are almost craving for Wrocław teaching us, and we create this global way of thinking about culture and how it operates. Jelenia Góra may not learn anything from Wrocław because Wrocław had some sort of amalgamation of various factors, such as, for example, the Secretary of Culture. It's not that the society, the local community is not nice, there's something wrong about the local society, and it's not spending money and then being faced with tickets not sold. How can we, people dealing or working for culture, how can we contribute to the life of our cities in order to make residents, make the culture part of their lives? Well, thank you very much for passing on the mic. Mark Stark was just right saying I didn't actually stress it in the evaluation. With the awakening, we succeeded with this awakening performance, and different people were joining in the various parades. Where Koza was thinking about the cues, the lines, it was a ritual, a social ritual. If you put one into the other, then you can shake the context, but the ritual is an important thing. So what is the stake? What is the game about? The participation in culture must not get privatized. There is a trend, civilization and cultural trend. Culture is available, so you simply open your computer, the machine, and you get on a website. The social function of culture is very important. It's important to make people who are part of the game. And there is another parallel about the forest. We look into a perspective and we see tall trees. And these are the events. But when you go further and we get an expert, a forest expert, and you can see the various layers, the various floors of the forest, and there are also some bugs inside, and that's all about the culture. Tomorrow we are expecting a presentation where we will see the whole order in a very clear way. What's urban in culture and what's cultural in culture. Now that's just an introduction. You wanted to say something? Anyone wanted to comment on what has been said? I can't see anyone willing to join in. Now, learning from Wrocław, what I've just said, no, not about the other cities saying, okay, let's do the awakening, let's do a concert, let's do some culture for myself. It's about the methods. For again, this unfortunate patch, some sort of support to local initiatives and making them or incorporating them into something bigger. We don't want just the lending, the events, big events. It's easier to account for them because there is a very specific evaluation. We have a star singing or performing and so many people attending or making up the audience. Okay, we have one big concert and we will have all of those who are not willing to return to the Philharmonics. We also need some other things to balance, to strike the balance. There are a couple of things we can learn from Wrocław. At least that was the first time in the history of Polish culture that someone organized a year-long festival. I was watching it, and now I've got the perspective of our 700-year anniversary. Krzysztof Maj and this weekends of tension when he was building up different events. I was against it, and then I must give you credit for that. It was successful. A year-long festival of culture, and there's lots to be drawn upon. Wrocław highlighted different zones, like architecture, for example, making part of the culture. Architecture was somewhere else, beyond the culture. Architecture was about interior design. But architecture here has become one of the pillars of the European Capital of Culture. Microgrants or social action, these are credited to Marek Stark. So our deputy mayor wants to copy, maybe not copy it, but get into the footprints and use this idea. This very unique festival has its educational effect. Urban culture, something new appeared. There were visual culture, performance arts, etc., jazz mixture. What you started doing was thinking in terms of the city, urban thinking, and this is one of the effects of European Capital of Culture, where locations were picked up for different concerts. So there are a couple of good effects. Now, so far we've been very happy with ourselves, but there were certain initiatives such as the Wrocław Forum of Culture with various visions, the definition of European identity, national culture, and we must not forget that there are certain projects beyond the city. My question is about year 2018, and we have two competitive narratives. 100-year anniversary, we don't know what it's going to look like, and the so-called independent culture. They want the celebration to go down to people. So how can we use the mechanism in order to avoid being arbitrary? Sometimes the state will use culture for very different and very strange purposes. This next year we hold election, the local election, and that's going to be the actually the ultimate survey. A slightly provocative question from Bogna: have we created a civil society? The answer, I'm sorry, is I'm afraid no. Edwin Bendig, in his blog or in the political magazine, he claims that we can't see certain forces, social forces or community forces. So the local elections are to be seen as the ultimate evaluation. Right at the beginning, I mentioned the concept of asylum. With the civil society, it's even an urban lifestyle, something has been created. Quite briefly, to COSA, I believe the COC was well harmonized and synchronized with the maturing of urban culture, but we had to define ourselves and our city. Yes, obviously you did have to do that, but I want to touch upon another thing. For Wrocław, that would be food for thought. What is the balance of your internal disputes, your internal contest? For a couple of years, as you were in the course of completing projects, you were blaming each other. Some people were objecting to granting money in this or that way. Some people were excluded. We've been watching that. The food, the big disputes. We were sensing the atmosphere as you were creating the project, and we're asking about the centrifugal effect. So what was the extent of disintegration of the cultural environment because of so much money, the influx of so much money? The report, Terra Incognita, this report focused on the professional circulation of culture. Professionals were commented on. No, my question isn't about professionals talking about European capital of culture, but professionals talking about professionals. We entered the professional environment, and all the tensions and conflicts are there. Thank you for this enigma. Now, obviously, on my way back to Warsaw, I'm going to read this report, because I for now. I can invite you for tomorrow at 9 p.m. Don't get upset, Bogna. The debate is parallel structures, that's the title, parallel structures. So in addition to the official stream of the culture, but there were some alternative circles, people who did not get the funding, and those people I'm absolutely excited about and looking forward for tomorrow's debate at 9 p.m. I believe that the opening of the institution, Krzysztof and Berenika are representing this institution and the need of sitting together because big money is not available anymore. And I think we can anticipate a very interesting talk. Hubert from CR. Let's see what we can offer to each other. We decided to sit together. I think the main thing is the question of trust at the national level, at the European level. Let's work on this. Quite paradoxically, with no such money available, maybe it's going to be easier to rebuild the trust. We've got beautiful infrastructure building, and I understand there is interest and people are willing to talk. I don't think Bogna is satisfied with your answer. You know, so many people have been, how many people have been murdered? The director is still alive. Do we love each other? I'm not sure. I mean, some people are fond of the others, some people fancy others. Now, the theatrical games, the so-called theatrical Olympic Games, and we have the evaluation and people from other parts of Poland. Why Wrocław was not talking with the voice of European capital of culture about the conflict in Teatr Polski, the Polish theater. No, brushed up the memory. Now, they were right. Sorry, they had their arguments, but there are counter-arguments as well. We knew somehow that there are certain processes and this situation showed that there was no communication going on between the two blocks or the two sandpits, so to speak. What are you asking about? Because I'm not sure. Is your question about that we had a good fight here, a good battery here in Wrocław, or we just started to love each other? Like in Lublin, we deal with a great integration. You'll be soon hated. These processes are dynamic. In groups of people, we have very complex relationships, and obviously, quite naturally, the implementation and completion of ECOC must have generated such tensions. It's a very straightforward question. Do you feel integrated? Do you feel that as people, you feel you may work better? I can feel conflict. Sorry. So, but you need to use the microphone. The conflict triggering creation. Well, the director wants to answer himself. Well, the question is not difficult. It's not a challenging question. It's a complex answer. The conflict is also a value in terms of the ECOC, and we defined it as one of the effects of ECOC. There was an objection against the official agenda of the ECOC, and it's worth noticing. In other cities, people were working on the strategies, cultural strategies, and we were asked a question in Wrocław: where will you be ready? And we said we need to wait until 2017, a year after the Great Awakening, the press conference when we were recapping on what went well, what went wrong. I didn't want to use the Wrocław strategy for until 2020. What was left? We wanted to invite, we wanted a contribution from the displeased parties. And we produce a document. We are not going to have 100% agreement, 100% consent. The conflict is one of the values of the European Capital of Culture. We did not get offended or injured by them. Dominica was one of the leaders in the process, and it's not a secret that we used the knowledge produced by the evaluation. We got some information because we wanted to verify our views. We wanted to use certain arguments and wanted to verify the arguments. Now, obviously, Bogna raised the most important question. We were heading for some sort of summary or conclusion. But I've never heard of any competition in Warsaw that wouldn't have ended in some sort of scandal. Yes, there is a theme, a marginal theme, but I believe we should put it on the front line. On this margin, one of the marginal themes of our evaluation, this is a benefit, a certain benefit of the ECOC is the silent knowledge. A year of experience amounting to more than 2,000 projects with thousands of people involved, people who gained experience, who learned, acquired knowledge. Running our survey, we reached such people. On many occasions, lots of them were critical about ECOC, but they also saw the ECOC as an opportunity, experience that would bring about certain benefits in the future. If the grain has been ordered, it has been planted, we know that we will get the interest, we will get the benefits, and that's going to be the greatest benefit of ECOC. Let me reiterate what I said right at the beginning. Urban culture in Wrocław, Szczecin, Warsaw, Lublin. Soon we will verify how permanent this culture is. Political events will verify the whole cultural perspective. 99 million for a year of projects in Wrocław spent by the Department of Culture, the Ministry of Culture. Can we challenge our scholar, gentlemen and ladies. Minister Gliński with 204 million. He's running various projects. Let's contrast that. Let's run a survey and see. There will be a clash of the two worlds. Mr. Gliński is carrying out project in the independent culture. Independent culture wears a moustache or does not wear a moustache on occasions. Thank you very much, everyone who joined us on the stage, those who asked questions and those who dared replying to questions. I'm terribly sorry for interfering with our cameraman, but we were moving and shifting, and I hope you've been able to follow us. And hand me over to our host. On behalf of the host and our evaluation team, thank you very much for the wonderful time, and may I invite you to the Truffle Station, the installation at 8:30 p.m. She opens the installation. And all those people who are flashing blue, please return your headphones. And tomorrow we start at 9 o'clock the evaluation of the European